There's one, is anybody aware of China or the outside world using the Olympics in 2008 as an opportunity to introduce new green technologies? Is Beijing, to anybody's knowledge, likely to become a kind of a model for the rest of China during the Olympics or after the Olympics? Is there a sign that they're using this as a showcase for environmental technologies or policies?
I'm not aware of it. I mean, I think most Olympics are now green, light shades of green, so I think there's probably some element of it, but I don't think it's been packaged and sold as a really green Olympics. I think Sydney did that at a much higher level, but I think there's, so some element, but not branded that way.
What is the experience, any of the experience of other developed economies tell us about when the public perception of environmental or health risks is likely to kick in? Are there any kind of historical models for that? Are there certain levels of wealth, $5,000 per capita GDP, for example, where we've seen in European countries or in Japan where some of these environmental concerns start to become, start to get pushed to the forefront over, problems of enough food and staying warm and the other basic survivability? Any studies show at what time we could sort of expect maybe this to bubble up from the bottom in China?
I'm sure there are some, but the one observation is the poorer economies tend to be the most polluting economies. Their waters tend to be the dirtiest, their air, their cooking techniques. So the advance of the economy, the advance of wealth, can actually bring environmental improvements and frequently does. I think the pace of industrialization and how it's done can obviously generate more and more industrialized pollution, but there are curves that economists have done, I just haven't seen them.
There are a couple questions about the U.S., so maybe we can get your predictions as to when the U.S. really is going to develop a global warming strategy, for example. Do you expect it to happen in the next 2 to 3 years? To the extent that the U.S. leadership on this issue is crucial for China's to spark some action in China, when can we expect that to happen?
It will certainly be debated quite, vociferously in the next year or two. The question is, will there be action, and whether we actually want action if it's not strong enough. So we're all engaged in this dialogue going on in Washington with the change of Congress. There may well be a bill. It may be vetoed. It may not get a bill this year, but it may be ready. A lot of work gets done for the next Congress. It's important to also point out, there's been a lot of activity going on at the state level as well that's putting a lot of pressure to do something at the federal level. So whether it'll happen in this Congress or is after the presidential election is, my guess would be probably after the presidential election, but a lot of work is being done now in terms of designing it and working on the details and seeing how far one can, how strong a regime we're going to get. And the debate's going to focus, in our view, really, and what we're getting ready to debate is really, what is it going to cost? Again, how much do we need to do to protect the climate, and what is the cost? And therefore, it goes back to the earlier discussion: what are the solutions we're looking at, and are there some really low-cost solutions we haven't implemented? Therefore, that'll allow us to do a lot more than people think. And so our focus right now is to get the best economic analysis on what it's going to cost to achieve different levels of reductions.
I think, it's, I agree with you, Ashok. Even from a layperson perspective, I think there's a lot more visibility, there's a lot more debate, and I just, I'm not sure that I can make a prediction, but there's just a lot of, I think, positive momentum towards sort of like getting to the right place.
I think that it's going to be that we may start in the next year or two, but unlike many other environmental bills, laws that have been passed, I think the changes, the economy-wide changes that are going to be needed in the U.S. as well as the rest of the world are going to take a long time, and policies are going to be set and reviewed and amended. We know today there are a lot of things we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We don't know today how to get greenhouse gases to the level we need to have an environmental effect. I don't think we're talking about legislation. You know, Kyoto was a 10-year process. When you look at the proposals put forward with the U.S. CAP, the group that NRDC and DuPont were a part of, we set a goal for 2050 of where we thought greenhouse gas concentration should be. This is a long ride that's going to take, starting immediately, starting as quickly as we can, but it's not as though we're going to have an answer in 2 years and stick with it for 50. It's going to take a lot of evolution, I think.
But the sooner we start,
the sooner we start, the better.
The cheaper
Absolutely.
it is, and the better it is.
Have there been any, to your knowledge or in your opinion, is there a way to work out some of these long-term goal of capping emissions of global warming, reducing them back to pre-1990 levels, that is sensitive to China's concern that we have to look at per capita global warming emissions? In other words, is there any way to set up a global regime that gives a certain amount of credit or a certain flexibility so that their per capita emissions over time could rise even as the European and U.S. per capita emissions are being reduced? Are there creative solutions to address that sort of the political sensitivity of that in China?
I think you're going to have to do that. I mean, I think any global regime that we come up with in the end has to allow for growth in emissions as economies still have, as you bring, if you're looking at the billions still in poverty, and to bring them, up, it's not going to be even at certainly the U.S. level, but certainly some level higher than where we are. So we have to allow for, in a global regime, growth in emissions in economies where growth hasn't happened yet. And yes, so developed countries are going to have to do more, so developing countries can be increasing their emissions. So I think that is going to have to be the global regime.
Good. Well, thanks very much to our three panelists, and I think it was a pretty good discussion, and everybody is now an environmental expert on China. So spread the word.